In the desolate mud of a battlefield in feudal Japan in the year 1598, a young warrior named Dai knelt amidst the wreckage of his life, his armor shattered and his spirit broken, facing the ultimate test of the samurai code. Beside him lay the lifeless body of his lord, a failure that, according to every societal norm and warrior ethos of the time, demanded immediate and ritualistic atonement through death. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the heavy silence of defeat, and as Dai placed the cold steel of his tanto knife against his stomach, his hands trembled not from fear of pain, but from the crushing weight of dishonor that felt heavier than the mountains surrounding him. He had lost completely, publicly, and irreversibly, or so it seemed. As the whispers of tradition demanded, he commit seppuku to cleanse his name. Yet, in that precipice between life and death, a dormant memory resurfaced, the voice of his father, a legendary warrior known as Dai the Iron, whispering that any fool can die for honor, but the true warrior lives for it. It was a radical, almost heretical thought in a world that fetishized the nobility of death, but it sparked a tiny, defiant flame within Dai's chest. That night, covered in the filth of his failure, Dai made a choice that would ripple through history and redefine the very essence of strength. He decided that he would not die to escape his shame, but would instead rise to conquer it. This decision marked the beginning of a profound transformation, moving away from the brittle perfectionism of the samurai class toward a resilient philosophy that understood the samurai way is not about never falling, but about never staying fallen, a principle encapsulated in the ancient proverb Nanakorobi Yaoki, fall 7 times, rise 8. To understand the magnitude of Dai's resurrection, one must first understand the depth of his fall, which began months earlier when he was the epitome of a flawless, albeit untested, samurai. At 24 years old, Dai was the picture of martial perfection, skilled with the katana, fiercely loyal to Lord Takahashi of the Eizan province, and brimming with a confidence inherited from his father's formidable reputation. He had grown up in the long shadow of Dai the Iron, a man who had fought in 40 battles and never lost a duel, and young Dai believed it was his destiny to effortlessly mirror that legacy. He had mastered every sword form, memorized every strategic text, and performed his peacetime duties with exacting precision. Yet he possessed a fatal flaw. He had never truly been tested when the outcome was uncertain and death was imminent. That illusion of invincibility was shattered on a spring morning when Lord Takahashi's 300 samurai were ambushed by 800 warriors of the Usuji clan in a narrow mountain pass. The chaos of real battle was nothing like the orderly drills of the dojo. It was a screaming, bloody disarray where Dai initially fought with technical proficiency, cutting down enemies and holding his ground. However, when the tide turned and Lord Takahashi's horse was struck, sending the lord to the ground, Dai faced his moment of truth and found his preparation insufficient against the raw brutality of war. He fought desperately against swarming enemies, but when a massive Usuji commander charged, Dai's defense crumbled, his katana shattered. He was kicked aside like refuse, and he was forced to watch helplessly as his lord was slain. The enemy did not even dignify him with death. They spat on him, called him useless, and left him alive to carry the burden of his failure, a punishment far more severe than execution. The journey back to his home village was a pilgrimage of agony, where every step was laden with the unbearable weight of survival when honor demanded death. Dai walked for 3 days, not suffering from his physical wounds, but from the psychological torture of being the sole survivor who failed his primary duty. When he finally arrived, ragged and ghost-like, his mother needed no words to understand the tragedy. She saw the shame etched into his very being. Yet, when he announced his intention to commit seppuku, expecting her approval of this honorable exit, she shattered his resolve with a piercing question. She asked if he truly thought his father would want him to take the easy way out. She challenged the very definition of honor, asserting that true warriors fight to the bitter end, and that killing oneself to escape shame was an act of cowardice, not bravery. She commanded him to fail better, to rise and keep rising. But Dai, drowning in self-loathing, could not internalize her wisdom at that moment. He proceeded to the garden that night, dressed in white, prepared to end his life. Yet as the blade touched his skin, a deep, primal instinct, perhaps the true spirit of his father, intervened. He realized that death was a termination, but he needed a transformation. He lowered the blade, stood up, and walked away from his home, his name, and his past. He had no lord, no reputation, and no purpose. But he possessed the singular, terrifying freedom of a man who has lost everything and thus has nothing left to fear, setting him on a path toward a new kind of existence. For 2 weeks, Dai wandered as a ronin, a masterless samurai, sleeping in forests and scavenging for food, until fate led him to a dilapidated shrine deep in the mountains where an old man sat feeding birds. This was no ordinary hermit, but Miyamoto Musashi, the legendary sword saint known as the Undefeated, though the man Dai encountered was humble, weathered, and radiated a terrifyingly peaceful presence. Musashi saw through Dai immediately, noting the heavy gait of a defeated warrior, and invited him to sit, eventually coaxing the entire story of the ambush and the failed seppuku from the young man. Musashi listened without judgment and then dismantled the myth of his own invincibility, revealing that his title was a lie. He had not been undefeated, but rather he had been defeated over 60 times in training and battles, yet he had never allowed defeat to become his permanent address. He explained that the only difference between him and the countless warriors who died in obscurity was not superior strength, but stubbornness, the refusal to stay down. Musashi led Dai to a small dojo behind the shrine, where the calligraphy for "Fall 7 times, Rise 8" hung on the wall, declaring this to be the only principle that mattered. He challenged Dai to see defeat not as a judgment on his soul, but as raw data, crucial information that highlighted weaknesses in technique and awareness. He argued that if Dai died now, his failure would be his legacy, but if he chose to rise, he could honor his fallen lord by becoming the warrior he was meant to be, transforming the tragedy into the foundation of a new, unbreakable strength. The training that followed was a brutal deconstruction of Dai's ego, designed not to teach him how to win, but how to lose without breaking. Musashi began by sparring with Dai, defeating him instantly and repeatedly. Within minutes, Dai had lost 20 times, and his frustration boiled over as he threw down his wooden sword, declaring the exercise pointless against such a superior opponent. Musashi calmly corrected him, explaining that the point was not to win, but to practice the act of rising, asserting that the resilience to stand up after a fall is a skill more valuable than any sword technique. He shared the philosophy that the human brain has 2 responses to repeated failure: learned helplessness, where one gives up, and anti-fragility, where one grows stronger under stress. Musashi was rewiring Dai's brain to override the amygdala's fear response with the prefrontal cortex's determination, teaching him to detach his self-worth from the outcome of the fight and attach it to the process of rising. Over the next few months, Dai lost hundreds of times, not just to Musashi but to junior students, and with every defeat, the burning shame began to cool into a steely resolve. He stopped getting angry and started getting observant, noticing the nuances of footwork and timing that he had missed before. When he finally won a match after 500 losses, Musashi congratulated him not on the victory, but on the fact that he had defeated the part of himself that wanted to quit, proving that he could endure 500 falls and still rise, making him dangerous because he was no longer afraid of failing. Having mastered the resilience of the dojo, Musashi pushed Dai into the deep training arc, a series of 7 metaphorical mountains designed to break him in every conceivable way. The first was a physical test of carrying a crushing stone up a mountain, pushing his body past the point of collapse. The second was a mental test of isolation in a dark room for 3 days, forcing him to confront the screaming demons of his mind and finding the silence beneath the chaos. The third mountain was the most painful, a social test where he was sent back to his village to walk among those who knew his shame, learning to hold his head high amidst whispers and insults, absorbing the social rejection without letting it penetrate his core. He faced tests of skill where he lost intentionally to learn, tests of fear where he jumped from cliffs to conquer the paralysis of death, and tests of patience where he polished a sword for a month to learn the value of monotonous persistence. The final mountain was the most harrowing, the test of purpose, where Musashi commanded him to find the Usuji warrior who had killed Lord Takahashi, not to exact revenge, but to thank him. This request tore at Dai's soul, as every fiber of his being screamed for vengeance. But he realized that holding on to hate was the habit of a broken man, while gratitude for the lesson of defeat was the mark of a master. He had to transcend the binary of friend and enemy to see the warrior as the catalyst for his own necessary destruction and subsequent rebirth. Dai traveled for weeks to find the Yasuji commander, Yamada, expecting a monster but finding an aging farmer who had put down the sword. When Dai approached him, not with a drawn blade but with a deep bow, Yamada was bewildered, bracing for a duel that never came. Dai spoke the words that completed his transformation, thanking Yamada for killing the weak, arrogant boy he used to be and for showing him the truth of his own unpreparedness. He explained that Yamada's dismissal of him on the battlefield had been the greatest gift, as it shattered the false ego that was holding him back. Yamada, recognizing the immense spiritual strength required to forgive one's destroyer, invited Dai to sit, and the two men, former mortal enemies, shared a profound conversation about the nature of war and growth. Yamada revealed his own history of failures and how he, too, had to learn to rise, creating a bridge of shared experience between them. In that twilight conversation, Dai finally let go of the last remnants of his shame. He realized that the boy who died on the battlefield was necessary compost for the man who now sat before his enemy with an open heart. He walked away from that farm lighter than he had ever been, having achieved a victory far greater than killing a man. He had killed the cycle of hatred and victimhood within himself, proving that he was truly unbreakable. Returning to the shrine, Dai was greeted by a smiling Musashi, who declared his training complete upon hearing that Dai had genuinely thanked his enemy. Musashi led him back to the calligraphy on the wall and delivered the final, esoteric lesson of the warrior's truth, that strength is not about being a fortress that never falls, but about being water that reforms after every disruption. He explained that civilians mistakenly believe strength is the absence of weakness, but true warriors know that strength is the management of weakness. He revealed that Dai's father, the Iron, was legendary not because he was magic, but because he was relentless, just as Dai had now become. Musashi emphasized that this path connects the practitioner to an eternal brotherhood of warriors across time who have all made the same choice to rise when gravity pulled them down. He told Dai that from this point forward, no defeat could truly touch him because he had mastered the alchemy of converting failure into fuel. Dai understood then that he had not been taught a new skill, but had been guided to unlock a latent capacity for resilience that exists in all humans, provided they are willing to endure the ego death required to access it. He bowed to his master, not as a subordinate, but as a peer in the lineage of the risen. 10 years later, Dai stood in his own dojo, no longer a student, but a master with a reputation for being unbreakable, when a young, trembling samurai named Kenji knelt before him, begging for instructions on how to commit seppuku after fleeing his first battle. Dai looked at the boy and saw a mirror image of his younger self, consumed by the same toxic shame and the same misunderstanding of honor. He gently commanded the boy to stand and walked him to the wall where the same words, "Fall 7 times, rise 8, were inscribed. Dai dismantled the boy's desire for death, explaining that suicide is the coward's disguise for honor and that the harder, truer path is to live with the failure and use it as a forge for character. He spoke with the authority of someone who had walked through the fire, telling Kenji that he stood at a crossroads between the easy oblivion of death and the grueling nobility of rising. He invited Kenji to join the brotherhood of those who refused to stay down, extending the same lifeline that Musashi had once extended to him. The cycle of wisdom continued as Kenji, tears streaming down his face, chose to rise, and Dai handed him a wooden sword, initiating him into the practice of resilience with the promise that they would start by falling 10 times and rising 11. Ultimately, the story of Dai is a testament to the universal human capacity for renewal. It teaches that life will inevitably knock us down, often brutally and unfairly, stripping us of our titles, our dignity, and our plans. We will fail, we will lose, and we will face moments where the darkness seems absolute. However, the warrior's way is not a path of perfection, but a path of persistence. It is the understanding that the count of falls is irrelevant as long as the count of rises is one higher. Whether in the mud of feudal Japan or the struggles of modern life, the principle remains the immutable law of success. It is not about feeling strong. It is about choosing to rise when you feel destroyed. The true victory is found in the quiet, often unnoticed decision to try again, to stand up one more time, and to refuse to let a moment of defeat become a lifetime of failure. Dai's journey from a suicidal failure to a legendary master serves as an eternal reminder that we are defined not by what knocks us down, but by the relentless, stubborn, and magnificent spirit that drives us to stand back up, again and again, until rising becomes our nature.